Kelly and I are really lucky to have Scott Brody, ACA Board Chair and camp owner of both day and overnight camps, to share his thoughts on the work of the ACA throughout the pandemic, the work moving forward, and the things that camp owners should be thinking about during the pandemic and beyond. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast.
Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We are going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Welcome, everyone. I am Kelly Shuna, co-owner, and executive director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp, located in Stillwater, Minnesota.
Hi, everyone. I'm Howie Grossinger. I'm the co-owner and director of Camp Robin Hood, a day camp in the suburbs of Toronto, and a co-owner of Camp Walden, an overnight camp in northeastern Ontario in Canada, which is superbly cold right now. And that's where I'm calling you from. If you're looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be useful to other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your network, please feel free to send them a note to listen. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, Howie. Nice to see you. It is darn cold here too. And you know what? In order to pay those heating bills up at the Go Camp Pro headquarters up in Canada, we have to start with a little sponsorship and thank you to those that make this podcast happen. So we want to give a big shout out to Camp Brain, one of our sponsors of this podcast. They have been in the camp industry since 1994 with 45 plus dedicated staff to meet your every need. Camp Brain provides a comprehensive and flexible registration system that can handle all of your day, overnight, family, holiday, and one-off camping events. I know that many camp registrations have been open for a while, but there are also many like my own and many that I talked to in California, day camps that are starting registration soon. So good luck to everyone that uses Camp Brain. They are fantastic. If you are looking to change your software or just look into Camp Brain, you can reach out to them at campbrain.com or 866-485-8885. All right, now that we have taken care of the business portion of this episode in the beginning and paid our money bills, we are now going to move on to our topic for today. Being at the beginning of the new year, Howie and I wanted to start off talking about kind of a state of the world of camping right now and looking ahead for the year to come and also the years to come. And the best person that we thought to talk about that topic is the one and only Mr. Scott Brody. He is involved in ownership in the day camp world and the residential camping world out on the East Coast, but he's also the ACA Board Chair. I'm sure many of you, along with Howie and I, have heard him speak at conferences, and we believe he has a really great perspective on the overarching view of camp and has so much great experience. So we are so grateful that Scott is willing to be with us this morning to give us an overview and tell us by starting a little bit about his transition into making camp a career for himself. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Kelly. Really kind of you and Howie to invite me to your podcast. Look, I'm a product of camp. I started as an overnight camper in 1972. And the camp I attended through most of my childhood is Camps Kenwood and Evergreen in New Hampshire. And I'm one of those people who got to sort of live my dream of becoming a counselor and sort of rising through the ranks and eventually being able to own the camp that I attended as a child. So that is really has always been my pride and joy. I love our community. We've been around for a little over 90 years, and it's a real treat. And then along the way, Kenwood and Evergreen had a day camp child. We opened a day camp combining our names. It's also actually called Everwood. And our former Kenwood and Evergreen head counselors are the directors at Everwood. Again, an incredible joy for me. And then just a few years ago, I had the privilege of working with a wonderful team that has run a wonderful day camp for the last 60 plus years. And they asked me to join and sort of head up the project, and that's at Camp Siwataro. So I live and breathe day in resident camp, and then I do a little bit as a volunteer.
Well, there's a lot on your plate, and I can totally, Scott, identify with being grateful and the opportunity to work in the world of overnight and day as well. And they both sort of blend into each other in so many unique ways. I feel privileged as well to be able to do that. Well, I didn't combine the names of my camps, Kelly, but I have a license plate that combines the two names of my camp. So I can't go as far as a camp, but Waldenhood is my license plate. So there you go. So that's the only way I can relate to that story. But Scott, it's really we want to take advantage of the time we have from you, because obviously with your role as the board chair for the ACA and your extensive work in the camping field, we thought that we could sort of get some perspective from you about where we're at in the state of camping related to the pandemic, perhaps, but just what's happened to the industry in different ways. And we really wanted to approach this from a very open-ended point of view, because I think that this conversation could easily morph into a conversation. How have the parents that we deal with in camping changed through the pandemic, and what does it mean going forward? How has campers changed? How does the operations of camp? And I think the last thing that I would say, or the last two things, is, the challenge of staffing we've talked a lot about in the last few shows and doing. So we need to unpack a lot of things. And as well, we're very curious about, particularly with the work you do, the inroads that the ACA has made, in terms of relationships with government influence and legislation and supporting the industry. So there's a lot to unpack. However, I just thought we would give you a few minutes to sort of, tell us, a little bit of perspective on what you've been through and what you see happening in the next little bit.
Well, my time at ACA as a volunteer has been really invaluable. And, being part of a community of camp professionals, who I've learned from and found fellowship with, and who I can lean on in challenging times, has just been, I think, one of the most important impacts to my professional life and my personal life. I met so many friends through ACA. And I've been volunteering in one way or another for a long time, and it sort of culminated with being elected national board chair. And my term is about to end in February at the national conference in just a couple of weeks. And it has coincided nearly perfectly with COVID. So, coming in, I had been part of the board, and I had been on the board a couple of times. And we had developed this amazing strategic plan, really thinking about a couple of critical things. One was, increasing the voice and the voice of ACA and the understanding of what camp can do for kids, right? Elevating that so that more parents, more families, more policymakers could really understand how incredibly impactful high quality camp experiences can be. And then sort of as the next piece of that, and maybe the most urgent matter, how can we open up the camp experience to more kids, right? So, there are 26 million kids who go to camp in one form or another right now, but there's somewhere around 75 million kids out there in the US, obviously many more in Canada. And, the question is, how do we make camp available to them, right? And so that really has been the focus of our strategic plan. But of course, what ended up happening is COVID emerged, and it became maybe the single biggest problem we as a field have ever faced. And it really presented us with an opportunity to problem solve like camp directors do. Right? Maybe if we have one collective superpower, it is that we are creative problem solvers. So I've really spent the last couple of years focused a great deal on COVID and clearing the path for camps to be able to serve kids throughout this pandemic safely, right? To operate safely, but also with a sense of urgency, since this pandemic has also kind of brought to the forefront this notion that kids' mental health is really sort of under siege, and that camp is a solution to so many of the challenges that face kids. So the pandemic has presented both problem and opportunity for us. And that's really that has been the focus of my work for these last couple of years, and the work of countless members of our association and our field.
We've had previous discussions, Kelly and I, on the opportunity that you talk about, that the pandemic has presented, and I'm sure, Scott, you know, for many years, the camps you're affiliated with, we've all tried to articulate the value of camp and the importance of camp, and in some, and we've said this before, in some kind of mysterious, kind of warped way, the pandemic highlighted the value of camp in a way that, for all of us who are great problem solvers and want to be creative in telling the message of camp, you know, it seems to me, at least for the people that I connect with who has started registration very early in the fall, the response to summer 2022 has been across the board quite overwhelming. And I think that, you know, I can speak to my own experience about the 2-week camper, first-time family to the camp experience is all of a sudden recognizing that, you know, I want my kid in camp for longer because I know the benefits and I know all these things. So I totally can identify, you know, clearly the challenge, and the ACA has done such a great job. And I know for those of us north of the border, we've participated in webinars and been actively seeking out information that camps in the States have been working through, and data, etc. But the opportunity to get more kids and expressing the value of camp is probably, you know, never been sort of more prevalent. Would you agree with that?
I certainly would. I think, look, as a parent, there's nothing that drives you forward more than need, right? And I think parents have really recognized kind of, I think, two things. One is that seeing their kids seated in front of screens when we were all working remotely and just getting sucked into this digital world that they're living in, that we just have sort of this gut level reaction, something's out of balance. And we need to provide our kids with balance in their lives. I think that's sort of one piece of it. Their social lives have suffered in ways that are very clear. And so looking for opportunities for them to socialize and connect and to practice those skills embedded in friendship, like teamwork and communication, right? Collaboration, you know, empathy, all of those things that are so important, resilience. Especially now, I think all of us understand how important that is as parents. And then the other piece of it is that parents, when camps were closed in 2020, and so many camps were closed in 2020, parents had to try to do it themselves. And they recognized, oh my goodness, it's a really tough job, right? And I think there was this feeling maybe that they had been taking camp for granted before. So not only was there a need, but there was an appreciation about how challenging it is to do this work in a safe, engaging, meaningful way. And I think those two things have really shifted the facts on the ground for families. And that's a big piece of what is driving demand.
I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they were also talking about this generation and the fear, that the many facets of fear that they've been brought up in, of recession, of pandemic, of school shootings, of sitting in a classroom and thinking about, am I safe, and practicing lockdown. And I think, you know, it made me think about camp and that mental health piece, but also feeling like camp is a safe place, and they cannot have to be in fear at camp. And it just really spoke to that mental health piece that you mentioned, related to the pandemic, but also to, I think, the reality of this generation, and using that fear to propel them for change. But it is a really very important thing, I think, to think about when we're thinking about that mental health. So I with camp, it just another facet of what we can do for those families. When you talk about ACA's strategic plan, about having a voice and the importance of camp and opening up camp, and obviously pandemic, like how we spoke to, has propelled that as we hoped. When you think about that new board chair, I'm not sure if you're continuing, I don't want to break any news here, but for the next board chair, or whoever is filling that position, do you think that plan is still the plan in place? Like, is that where we're still going with 2022, or do you see that vision changing in this next year?
I think that I see that vision accelerating. So, when my term ends, Liz Fogle, who has been part of the national board now for a number of years, is going to take over as board chair. And Liz is an extraordinary leader. I first got to know her when she was director of education at the Walt Disney Company. And so she comes out of the private sector, the non-camp sector, although she is a member of our community in every way. But she also has a PhD in education. She comes from the ed policy space and the child development space, and really understands federal policy and a lot of different dimensions that it's tougher for us as camp operators to enter those arenas, right? Those are established conversations that have been going on for decades. Liz has been part of those conversations. And this is, the pandemic has also done something really interesting for ACA as an organization. I think the leadership that we showed in driving forward a way for camps and other youth-serving organizations to operate safely through the pandemic, through the development of our field guide, our work with EH&E, the public health consultants we secured very quickly, our partnership with CDC, the advocacy we've done at state levels with various departments of public health to get them to align with that guidance to the greatest extent possible. All of those things have really changed the way other organizations and policymakers look at ACA. So now we're having very different conversations than we had 3 years ago. I remember when I first served on the board, we all had this aspiration, when are we going to be able to get a seat at the table, right? That was sort of the language we used. Well, in some ways now we're setting the table, right? And we are working more closely with all of the youth serving organizations out there around this, and thinking of the importance of summer learning, the importance of the experiences that kids have access to through camp, the learning and development that occurs, the critical learning and development that occurs. And we're also in a moment where the US government has provided billions of dollars to support summer learning, including social and emotional learning. So the notion of fueling camp school partnerships to try to address some of this, traditional learning loss, but really the social and emotional learning loss that is a casualty of COVID. It provides an opportunity for the conversation to change on an ongoing basis. And I think that is maybe one of the most exciting things. And Liz is the perfect person to lead that work. So I don't think we could have someone better than Liz. And we're also blessed to have Aaron Dworkin on our board, who is the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association. And those members are run programs that are more traditionally thought of as academic programs, but that's really not the case. They actually do a lot of what we do, and some are camp programs. We're really brother-sister organizations, and now we are walking arm in arm together, saying, let's think about how to address the needs of the whole child and how we can be part of the solution rather than sticking kids back in classrooms for summer months where they're not getting the things that they really need right now.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, Scott, because it sounds like the notion of the seat at the table is no different than what I know we've been experiencing here in Canada. And while the national organization has profile here in Canada, it's the provincial associations that typically need to work even harder to some extent with the policymakers. And it sounds like, I know for us, in my view, because I've played a role in as a volunteer within our local association as a president in the past, it was amazing, as I'm sure the goal for ACA is, we had to play a very much an educational role with the policymakers because, you know, we like to think that they know what we do as an industry and the impact we have, but had they understood us better at the beginning of the pandemic, maybe the wheels would have turned a little faster for us. But the phase of education took up so much time that was a necessary piece to it. Having said that, I think the attitude that I hear you sort of overarching sort of messaging here, which I subscribe to or ascribe to, is that we just can't end it here. There's going to be something else down the road, and these relationships and this vigilance of dealing with policymakers and legislators, etc., needs to be an ongoing process because the next crisis may happen at some time frame, and we need to be ready to pick up the phone or have our lobbyists talking to people so they know who we are. I know that's something that we've had to learn up here, and I would say that in Canada, it would be fair to say Canada's taken a very conservative, very similar to Northeast United States viewpoint and lockdowns and quarantine and that kind of stuff and mandates. I also find it very interesting too, you know, I'd be curious about your opinion. This will be a summer where, you know, more than ever, given the current variant, kids are going to be coming to camp with very different in-person experiences from all over the world and all over the United States and Canada. You know, the way we can see arenas filled in the Southwest at sporting events versus what's happening in Canada versus what's happening in other parts. I just find it really interesting as camp directors and owners how we need to sort of plan staff training around bringing different groups of kids, campers, and staff who've had all very different experiences in this sort of second full year of the pandemic. I just thought I'd throw that out and get maybe a quick thought on that.
Yeah, look, this is, you know, think about what we know now that we didn't know when the pandemic started. You know, I think, first of all, the notion of running camp in a pandemic is now something that we know how to do it. We've got the playbook, we've learned the playbook, we've riffed on the playbook, right? And we're ready for, you know, community spread, no community spread, you know, we have to bubble, no bubble, you know, we have to test, how much testing? We know where to get the resources. You know, I think we've that which was sort of the unimaginable thing in 2020. How do we do all of that? That's now sort of second nature to us, right? And I think, you know, we all probably thought going into 2021 that was also sort of going to be the thing, right? But we didn't have a huge wave until Delta started creeping in toward the second half of the season. But what we did have was a set of other challenges, additional challenges. Right. So, you know, I think we're ready for what will come this summer. You know, it's certainly my hope that that this summer will be easier to navigate. But there are these knock-on effects of the pandemic, which provide both challenge and opportunity. Right. So to me, opportunity is things like the conversations that are taking place about economic recovery, how do we get our kids ready for a rapidly changing world? The pandemic is only one piece of that. We've been in that conversation for a while now in DC, but people are really talking about it more. And so that helps us because camps are in the business of building those critical skills for kids that frankly they're going to need in an AI world, right? So, in some ways we're in very well positioned for that. But then there are more immediate challenges like employment, right? Can we find enough people to work in camps? I know that is top of mind for people. The Great Resignation, certainly, it impacted us a bit for sure, but it was very challenging for camps to recruit, enough people, particularly camps that were closed the summer before, right? And so we're sort of out of their hiring cycle. So I think we're looking forward, we're looking for solutions there. And I think, the most inspiring things that I've heard from the field regarding that particular challenge of employment come from camps that are saying, okay, we have actually been investing in the training of our staff for the last several years because we've recognized we have to do this work with kids. And in order to do this kind of work with kids, we have to train our staff. And now people are sort of coming to say, okay, what's the value add for staff? Right? What is it that we're giving to our staff that make the value proposition of working at a camp irresistible? And I think that's sort of today's problem that everyone is focused on.
Yes, that's definitely, I feel it. It's recruitment time. So that's a very real top of the minds of many camp owners. So thinking ahead, you've talked a little bit about ACA and the business, this partnership with schools and summer learning. What do you think is really important right now for camp owners to know or to be thinking about for the year ahead? Is it knowing about legislation in their state? Is it knowing about grants for summer learning and camp and how they can partner together? Is it about visa, J1 visa? I mean, what do you think camp owners should really know right now going into this year?
Kelly, the answer is yes. It's D, it's all of the above. It is focusing on what we are giving to our staff, right? And that doesn't just have to be money, right? A lot of people go to money as the solution, but we've got a generation of kids that really want to give back, want to be inspired, want to do world-changing work. And if we can help them see their role as a camp counselor in that space, that can be incredibly helpful in recruiting the kinds of role models we want, right? J1 visas last summer was a perfect storm, right? Following sort of the debacle with the sort of implosion of that program toward the end of the Trump administration, when it was shut down and then embassies were shut down. So we had an understaffing problem even when it started up again. And then we had a travel ban. Right? It was a trifecta of trouble with J1. And ACA has been engaged in those conversations with the White House, with Congress, with the State Department for a number of years now, proactively and occasionally reactively when we've had a huge challenge. And we've made enormous headway. The Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, who was just named a few months ago, Secretary Elcon is going to be participating in the national conference in a couple of weeks. That's only happened once in our history as an association. We have a real friend and ally there, a real believer in the J1 Camp Counselor program. I think I really, there's so many things that can happen in the world, but I think J1's going to be okay this year. And that's going to be really helpful for us. But we also have to make our contingency plans like we do, right? Just in case, and diversify where you're getting your exchange visitors from so that if one country is having trouble processing visas, it doesn't impact your entire population. Things like that. Those things are going to be top of mind for sure. from a regulatory standpoint, we are going to, I'm sure, go through another iteration of state level or provincial or local and county regulations regarding our operation this summer. The good news is that, if you think of what schools have been doing, right, which is not, let's close the school, it's test and stay, right? That's what they've been doing. That's extending into childcare spaces now. Our governor in Massachusetts just announced a test and stay program for childcare. I think the notion of it being all or nothing in terms of the operation of camps next summer, that's going to be yesterday's approach.
I would agree.
So, and then of course the potential and likely availability of therapies, not just vaccination, which is obviously sort of the first line of defense, being up to date on vaccinations. And camps are going to face real challenges and questions around, do I mandate vaccination for my staff, for my campers, right? But, then on the plus side, treatment, right? So Paxlovid, this treatment that Pfizer has put out there, not a lot of doses of it out there right now. By the time we get to summer, hopefully those 30 pills given over the course of 5 days will take you from an infectious case to a non-infectious case within 24 or 36 hours.
Yes.
Right? So I think the way we handle these things is going to be very different and is going to be sort of just something else that we are used to doing, right? As we adjust our practices to reflect, the current environment. And we're just going to continue to problem solve through it. But I think it's all going to be manageable to us. We just have to lean into it. We just have to stay engaged and plan.
Yeah. Kelly, I love Scott's optimism is so we've got this is wonderful because Kelly and I have been thinking in similar terms and I'm really curious if I could, Scott, just for a moment, as a camp operator, because at its core, you're a camp pro and you do all this great volunteer work and it's so impactful. But when you think of your own operations and the things that you're thinking about as we get into the third year of pandemic and stuff, some of the discussions we've been having with guests are about sort of the business side of camp and investment and expansion and the impact of the pandemic in terms of being perhaps a little slower to make any moves because there's still a little bit of uncertainty, or in some cases a lot of uncertainty depending on where you are. I just thought we would tap into sort of your own thoughts on the camp operator owner mindset about, are you seeing, are acquisitions of camps happening now? Are people buying camps? We've been talking about buying and selling camps a little bit at this season. I thought that maybe we would sort of tap into that because I think that's kind of relevant to most of our listeners about what the landscape is from your vantage point.
Sure. Well, look, there are transactions going on. And I think anytime you've got a stressful environment like the last few years have been, and 2020 was just an economic disaster for a lot of camps. And while camps have managed to sail through that storm, and in the U.S., the PPP aid we were able to get for camps, and ACA, by the way, had a huge impact on the PPP aid that camps got. Were it not for our intervention, camps would have gotten half of what they got through PPP. Truly, that was how the size of the impact. That likely won't be there this summer, but I think most camps are over that hurdle, right? And now thinking about, demand is high, as you said, Howie, and that's a wonderful thing. But, everyone's a little chastened, right? We seem to be on this nice long kind of 50-year run where things were mostly smooth, like a recession here and there, but we weathered them reasonably well. And then you hit something like this, a world-changing moment. And I'm sure for people who are thinking about retiring anyway, that triggered, more thoughts about that. And so we do see some camps changing hands for sure. In terms of my own camps and what we're thinking about for the coming summer, We are working actively on building out our camper care teams to increase the number of professionals with mental health training we have, simply just to support the typical anxieties and worries and stuff that kids and college age staff are coming to camp with these days, to help them process it. And I feel like we saw a lot of that last summer. Kids coming out of that isolation, and bringing a lot of stuff with them. And we thought, okay, it would be very smart for us to really sort of change our staff distribution and the talent set that we have, and bring in some folks with a little more expertise who could coach our counselors and help them and help our kids. So that is probably an area we're really looking at.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, you hit a pandemic like this, it's sort of like, the summer where you had norovirus at camp or something like that, right?
Yes,
and suddenly
exactly.
you kind of change your hand washing practices, and you're really thoughtful about that. And you say, maybe I shouldn't share tongs at the salad bar. I think we're going to have a lot coming out of COVID, where we think about what kinds of changes we made during COVID that we want to keep for public health reasons. And then, and we've all sort of heard this conversation among our peers, what kind of things that we had to simplify during COVID that we might just want to keep simple, right?
Oh, yeah.
Less more, right?
Absolutely.
All of us are thinking that less is more, and maybe this bells and whistles race we've all been on for the last, couple of decades, maybe we need to slow that down a little.
Yeah, and I think that's a big one, because I think we've had conversations not only on the show here, but privately amongst the various networks we have, where not feeling, we've all used a variation of the phrase back to basics in marketing camp and all this stuff over many years, and now I think we experienced and whether it be your days off protocol for your staff and doing certain things for them that you said, I would never do that in the past. And then you're saying to yourself, well, we did it and we now have a happier staff. So maybe we're going to do that. We're going to continue to do that. My wife who co-owns camp with us, and we've all used the phrase, but she's always talking about the silver linings, the things that you were resistant to do because you said, there's no way we could do that you did it, and etc. I know at my overnight camp, we built an extensive outdoor patio for several hundred people. And now we're saying, well, we got all these picnic tables, maybe outdoor lunch at these tables will now be the feature. We're only going into the dining hall this many times in a week, or etc. So I think we all have an opportunity with our teams to really look at those things, and then say, what do we keep, etc. Public health, no doubt. Definitely some features there. I'd like to just for a moment, and then I'll just turn it over to Kelly. You talked about the reflection of camp owners on perhaps their own personal timetable for being in the business. And there's no doubt that, these 2.5 years or 2, 3, almost 3, listen, I think for some people it's expedited the timetable. What we've gone through, and I'm sure you've met, Scott, as I have. There are a lot of people with the titles Director Emeritus in our organizations now who look at us and saying, oh, I'm so glad it was you and not me, right? Like, and we just recently had a conversation with camp owners who said that. But as a person who's part of a family camp ownership, the generation that, came before us, our family members are saying, you know what, we've had our challenges, nothing like this. So glad it was you guys. But there's also an acknowledgement that this generation of camp owner has really embraced the challenge across the board and the most professional and so creative and innovative ways to really keep at the heart is what do we deliver, and that is a safe and obviously worthwhile experience. So I'm glad you mentioned those things, because I know we've been thinking about it too. Kelly?
Well, what really speaks to me that you're talking about also, Scott, is that camper care team. I know Howie and I have talked about that, but at our camp this summer really, really experienced the high level of needs of kids and staff. And what that looks like at day camp versus residential camp. And I'm looking forward to having conversations with other camp owners about what does that look like, and what are you hiring for in a day camp versus in a residential camp, and who are those staff members? Because our excuse me, camper advocate was very overwhelmed this summer, and it was like all the other duties that person had off the table, and other people were brought in. So I think that's a really relevant conversation, and that speaks to what's on my mind beyond just staffing and recruitment. So I think I'm excited to have those conversations. So I'm glad you brought that up. And as we wrap up, because we could talk forever, this always happens to us, Howie. We have these great guests, and it's hard to be
Yes.
mindful of time. It's so hard. Scott, you're so knowledgeable. Anything that you, with this audience we have, that you want to say to camp owners, anything about legislation initiatives or things you want them to be taking, think about taking on, or things coming down the pipe with your crystal ball? Any other final thoughts as we wrap up?
I think we always say there's a camp for every child, right? And I'll say for me, and I know the association as a whole, is working toward this goal. I really want to open up camp experiences to more kids. And I think in order for that to be true, my organization needs to be more diverse than it is, so that kids, of color, kids from other backgrounds, can see themselves in their counselor leadership, in our camp leadership. So one of my personal goals is really to be more intentional about that as we move forward. And then to take advantage of things that might not necessarily be the first things we think about, like for our day camps, how do we partner with our local school districts? Whether it's bringing in kids to our traditional camp program or putting a program together at the end of the summer designed for kids from our local district to help them transition from elementary school to middle school or middle school to high school. I think there are these ways that we as professionals can be more intentional about opening up our communities and sharing the secrets of what we do, so that more kids get to experience them. And fortunately, from a policy perspective, the money is there, right? So it doesn't have to all be you giving, right, and doing. This is actually an economic model to support it. And it exists in every state in the country right now. I'm not sure what's happening in Canada with summer learning, but I really think that a lot more attention is going to be paid to this, and there's an opportunity for us to impact millions of additional kids by opening ourselves up to that. And sometimes it's tough to think about it that way when you're trying to solve so many other problems, but I always save a piece of my brain for that part of the mission.
Yeah, and I think that reaching to so many underserved families and communities that we know at its core the benefits of the camp experience. And I think there are movements afoot up here for sure to partner, etc. And I know we've done it across the board with sort of the 10-month school system in a significant way. It's kind of interesting, and I'm sure we've all had this. I can speak personally. A staff applicant, when we ask about previous camp experience, sort of this broad thing, it is amazing how, even the one-day excursion to the local day camp for a very different experience than school, the retelling of just that one day in a camp experience is significant for a 17 or 18-year-old who's never been to camp formally in the ways that we define it. But just that one experience where the school said, we're going to experience camp for a day, and we're going to do leadership training, and you're going to do a high ropes course, and we're going to do that. Even for one day, take that as an example of, if we were at all able to give more access, what it could mean for a longer commitment, better staffing, recruitment opportunities, and helping these young people set themselves up successfully for whatever post-secondary looks like for them. College, university, community college, the trades. We know it can all start at camp. So I think that's a very, very great message. And I'm on behalf of Kelly, I'm grateful that you keep a part of your brain for all that stuff too. So way to go. We're going to continue to do some business here as we come to the end of another great episode, and that is to thank our other sponsor, and that is Camptivities. If you're at all interested in a better solution for scheduling camp activities, whether it be day or overnight, Kelly and I encourage you to check out our friends at Camptivities. Are you interested in manual adjustments, rainy day scheduling, tons of customizable settings that can address the uniqueness of your camp day? They've got 50 plus reports to work with and a great team of people to help you get set up in a very, very valuable tool. Check out Camptivities, and I am confident you'll determine that it might actually work for you. And you know what? Most importantly, save your team a ton of time. Check them out. Be sure to visit camptivities.com, set up a time to chat, and explore how Camptivities can make camp life for your team just a little bit easier. Kelly?
All right. Well, we always end our show with something that's inspiring us right now. This can be a book, an article, a podcast, documentary, just anything that's adding that fuel to our fire in the current moment as camp owners and leaders. So we will start off, and Scott is prepared, which is fantastic. So I'm just going to share one that's not an item, but it's a conversation that I had with a returning staff member. So in a returning staff member check-in, I always ask, why are you choosing camp again? It's a choice. And there are a lot of choices that you can have. And it's her first year as a teacher and in high school. And the thoughts that she shared with me about the confidence that it gave her as a teacher. Because, we go to college and we have the skills, but do you really feel like you can do this? The confidence that it gave her for her job, the skills, the many skills, even just the call and response that she learned at camp, to be able to use that with her campers. And also, her thoughts on returning to camp. So going through this year and what that's been like, and she could take a summer off. And those teachers always inspire me that they are choosing to spend their summer at camp, and her speaking to being outside, but also that what we say we're going to do at camp, we do it. We walk the talk of it's about the kids, and we want to meet their needs and provide a space for them to be who they are. So that's been inspiring me in recruitment and having those returning staff come back. So I always appreciate those conversations, adding that fuel to my passionate fire. So Howie, do you want to go next and share your inspiring item?
I have a couple, and I wanted to share a book that I've become quite familiar with, and it's by Greg McKeon, and it's called Effortless. And at its core, it's how to reach a feeling of effortless doing challenging and essential projects. And at a time where we are embarking on many challenges in preparation for 2022, I found the content of the book really reassuring that we know we can do hard things, but we can reach a level of effortless if we follow and can commit ourselves to a prescribed set of answers to certain questions. And I found that the book to be really, really relevant, and I encourage people to check it out. Effortless by Greg McKeon. And I just quickly, Kelly, I just have to say that those conversations that I'm currently having with returning staff and new staff has been quite inspiring. I think this is under the umbrella of you never know the impact of a new what camp will have on a brand new staff member. I think we can all agree we're in the sales business when it comes to what camp can do for a person. That's part of our job. But I just recently got to hear a great story from a brand new staff member who was very impressive last summer, and he visited his family over the holidays on the island of Anguilla, which is where his family originates from. And very close-knit family, etc. And as part of their holiday celebrations, they rented a bus, and it's a very small island, but they decided to do a little tour and have stops and go for lunch and then go to a beach and everything. And my friend Malik told me the story that everyone was quiet on the bus, but he stepped up, and because of his experience at camp, was the bus counselor for 6 hours, doing games and songs and activities, and his family was looking at him saying, "What has happened to you?" And all he said was, I spent a summer at camp on the bus every day to and from camp, and this is what we do with kids and staff. And it was just again reaffirming about just something like that just has buoyed me even higher about the value of camp. So I thought I'd share that. That's inspiring me as well these days.
I love that. Thanks for showing. Thank you for sharing that, Howie. All right, Scott, what would you like to share?
I want to share a resource with everyone. So many of you know Dr. Michael Thompson, the child psychologist who wrote Raising Cain and Homesick and Happy, a book about the impact of camp experiences on kids. He and his co-author, Rob Evans, wrote a book for the independent school community where they do a lot of consulting. That's actually I think, very useful for camp professionals. And it's called Hopes and Fears, Working with Today's Independent School Parents. And it's really about where parents are right now, what's driving their anxieties. I think so many camp professionals felt challenged last summer. Maybe 2020, if you got a lot of grace from families. 2021, maybe a little less. These two amazing psychologists really it's a short book, and it's very concise and insightful. Can really give us an interesting perspective on where parents are and how to have constructive dialogue.
That sounds like a great resource. I know I'm familiar with Michael Thompson's work, and it's always a great read and so much good stuff. So thanks for bringing that to our attention, and all of that information will be in our show notes. So please check it out. We're now at the end of the show, and it's a time for us to say farewell until the next time we're together. But before we do so, we always ask our guests, Scott, if someone wanted to reach out to you and connect, what's the best way to connect with Scott Brody?
You can reach me by email at Scott, SCOTT, at Kenwood, KENWOOD, then a little hyphen or minus sign, and then evergreen, like the trees, .com, kenwood-evergreen.com.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And Kelly?
Yes, I can be reached via email at Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com.
Amazing. And you can reach me at Howie, HOWIE, at camprobinhood.ca. So look forward to hearing from you. If you'd like to reach out, give us some ideas for future episodes as well. Don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we mentioned in this episode and lots of good stuff there from our show and the other great Go Camp Pro podcasts out there. We really hope you enjoyed this. Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for making some time in your busy schedule to join us. It's been really great to have you.
Thanks, Howie, and thanks, Kelly.
Kelly, till the next time, we look forward to being together. Stay warm, stay safe, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you and sharing with you on the next Camp Owners Podcast.